What's the wildest, craziest, most foolish thing you've ever done? If it didn't have something to do with love, it doesn't count. With the events of this evening, we begin the Triduum, the 3 days that mark the climax of Holy Week and Lent, the 3 holiest days of the year, of the holiest week of the year for Christians. The Triduum encompasses the 3 most unique and dramatic liturgies of the Christian year: the rites of Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and the great Vigil of Easter. And each of these services is based on a foundational event of the Christian religion, namely the Last Supper, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. Another fact about this trio of days is their specific significance in the 4th Gospel, the Gospel according to John. The week the Triduum begins in Bethany at the house of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. John's Gospel makes a point of telling us that a dinner party for Jesus and the 12 in this house takes place exactly 6 days before Passover. This occasion was made famous in its own right because of the anointing of Jesus' feet at that supper by Mary. That was the gospel for 2 Sundays ago. The Sunday used to be called Passion Sunday. As John tells us, she took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Let's be frank about how shocking and risque this performance was. Such anointing was an intimacy normally reserved for the bedroom between a wife and her husband, or between a courtesan and her client. On the occasion described by John, I take what Mary did as an over-the-top expression of, 1, how much Mary loved her Lord and Rabbi Jesus, and 2, how much she feared for his life. More than anyone else in the room, she had absorbed the mood of dread and impending loss that filled her Lazarus and Martha's home that night. In effect, she took on the unspoken feelings that everyone else was denying. She literally acted these feelings out in the most outrageous way open to her. When the heady aroma of the scented oil filled the house, it was a metaphor not only of her love and anxiety for Jesus, but the affection and the fear of all the others. Jesus immediately gave voice to these feelings when he told the company what Mary's anointing meant to him. Leave her alone. She bought it for the day of my burial. Or as Mark's Gospel puts it, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a beautiful service for me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. What happened that evening in Bethany set in motion all the events of the following week. Hence, we arrive at this day in the last week of Jesus' mortal life, the evening before the Passover lambs were slaughtered, and Jesus with them between two murderous brigands on the cross. It is a week that John wants us to know is patterned after the first week of creation in Genesis 1. Just as God rested on the seventh day of that week, so Jesus' corpse will rest in the tomb on the seventh day of this week, this last week of the old creation. Then, with his resurrection from the grave on the first day of the next week, the first week of a new creation, which is also the eighth, the first and last day of the longest and most extraordinary week in human history. When Jesus washed his disciples' feet on this night, he did so in the context of the whole drama of the week that will always be for Christians the week that was. A week that began with the anointing of his feet in the house at Bethany. It continued the next day with the carefully staged and truly thrilling entry into Jerusalem. The Last Supper occurred 3 days later, where he transformed the Passover remembrance of the Jewish exodus out of slavery in Egypt into a feast, a future feast of forgiveness, freedom, faith, and life-giving food through the resurrection presence his disciples would soon know. The foot washing incident we particularly remember and reenact tonight has been given many meanings. It has been called an acted out parable of the humility, love, and willingness to withhold nothing of himself from us when God sent the Son to take on fully your flesh and blood and mine. It is a metaphor for the spiritual cleansing and rebirth we can experience through baptism. It was a symbolic preparation and blessing of the disciples' feet to ready them to be sent out on their missionary travels to proclaim the gospel to all nations after the resurrection. Whatever else it was, or we might call it, surely it was a mirror image of what Mary did for him in Bethany 5 days before. Foot washing